Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for session two. You will know you're in the right session if you were looking for the Modern Career Development in a Digital World session by Kellie Corbisiero. I'm Leslie Wisdom. I'm your host for today. So just wanted to give a couple announcements. As we're going through the session today, if you have any comments you'd like to share, please do so in the Whova platform in the chat section tab. If you've got questions for Kellie, you can type them into the Q&A section, but we're going to address the questions at the end of the presentation so that Kellie can get through all of her content first. If you're having any technical issues, just drop me a note in the chat and I'll do my best to help you out with that. The presentation for this session is at the very bottom of the, the session area in Whova. So if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that you can download the presentation. And then I do ask that at the end of the session, if you don't mind liking the presentation, and then also please do rate the session as well so that we get your feedback for that. I think that's all of the announcements that I had, and now I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful host, our wonderful presenter, Kellie Corbisiero, for this session, Modern Career Development in a Digital World. Thanks, Kellie.
Thank you, Leslie. Welcome. As Leslie said, my name is Kellie. I have my master's degree in counseling and I specialize in career counseling and graduate school. I own a small business, Connect Career Consulting, and I'm also a career counselor and professor at Southwestern College. Thank you all for choosing this session and for coming today. Today, I'm going to talk to you about how our world is shaping and how careers are changing and strategies that you can use with your students to help them navigate this new workforce and this new environment, because I believe, like many of you, it is not changing. It is here to stay. And so we will need to learn to adapt and how that works. So just really quickly about me, I am the CCC is a certified career counselor. It's a credential from the National Career Development Association. As I said, I own my own small business where I do consulting and training for counselors. I also do counseling and coaching. And then at Southwestern College, I am a faculty career counselor and professor. And I've been working in higher education for well over 10 years. I actually started in higher education in my early 20s as a student assistant. So I like to kind of joke that I've had every job in education from student assistant. I've also worked as a classified professional. So I've done what you might call staff type of work as well. I worked in the maintenance department. I've worked in counseling offices. And then slowly I went into graduate school and worked towards becoming a faculty member. So I've had every little position. So I really feel that that helps me understand the unique roles and the unique experiences of everybody that works in higher education at community colleges. And I did initially work at a state university as well. In addition to that, I'm a first generation college student. So I'm the first one in my family who ever thought about college. College was not talked about in my family. I'm not even sure exactly 100% how I ended up in community college, but I did. And I started. Community college was my home. That's where I started my college career at before transferring onto university and onto graduate studies. So that's a little bit about my background. Why I started my business and why I like to talk about modern career development is because this is a huge passion of mine. I see a lot of really confused students, and I find that a lot of the things we can do to help them are not very complicated. They're actually quite simple. And they're things that any of us can do, whether you are a high school counselor, a college counselor. There's a lot of really easy things you can do to help our students understand career development, and especially when we talk about in a COVID type of environment, what careers look like. We had, of course, many 2020 graduates finding difficulties trying to get a job because everyone went remote. A lot of schools and different businesses froze their hiring because they didn't know what was happening. So new way of doing things that will definitely help people and help our students. So these are the topics I'm going to be covering today. I'm going to talk about the old way, the modern way. We're going to talk about branding and the importance of our students building a social media brand. We're going to speak to LinkedIn and digital resumes, as well as digital interviewing. And at the end, I do have lots of free Canvas resources for all of you. So I'll give you an access to one of my Canvas modules that I created that's free for anyone. And I'll give you instructions on how to find it. And I know all of us in the community college use Canvas. I'm not sure if the high schools in our region are using it as well. But if you have questions about that, we'll address them at the end. So that's what we'll be covering today. So because I'm a career purist, I studied under Al Levin. So he is one of the career theorists that worked really closely with John Crumboltz. And he also helped curate some books and some self-help books that I actually use for the basis of my training, which would be one of the books, Luck is No Accident, Making the Most of Happenstance in Your Career Life. And I actually use this with my students in my career development class that I teach. And the students rate the book each semester. And I have a 99% positivity rating for that book for a career development class. So if you're looking for a book for your career development class, I think I have one here in my office space. I'll show you it at the end of the workshop. So what I really want to start talking about is this career versus job rhetoric. This is one of the most misinterpreted terminologies that I see students not quite understanding. A lot of students believe that they have one education, which equates to one job, which that job is then a career. And that's where their career span looks like. And any of you sitting in here, I'm sure that you all know that you are not probably doing the job you thought you'd be doing at 18. Most of you are doing something quite different. Many of you may have not even known that a college counselor or a high school counselor was really a job or a possibility for you. I didn't even know what a college counselor was at 18, unfortunately. And so there's this myth that I'm going to get this one job, one education. And so when students come in to see counselors at 18 years old, they're usually quite stressed because they're like, I don't know what I want to do forever. And I love when I get to tell them, well, don't worry, you don't have to figure that out today or tomorrow or next year, because they are going to change. So the fact is that career is a journey, and you will have many jobs that make up your career journey. So career is that lifelong process. And kind of in career development theory, we call it that womb to tomb, that birth all the way to tomb analogy of it's a journey. So even your first job is just one of many jobs that will help you on your journey. And some students like to tell me, they say, well, I just work fast food. That's just a job. And I say, well, that's a job where you're learning important skills, time management, organization, how to get along with your colleagues, customer service. There's a lot of really important skills that are being learned in that first job that they will take with them into the next job. So I also like to say that there is no unimportant job. All of the jobs you have are important and will add to your career journey. You will take them with you as you go throughout your life. So really kind of, even if we can start by just telling students your career is a journey, you will have more than one job. You won't just be finishing college to get to this one job. And you don't need to be super passionate about it. It doesn't need to be your passion, the best thing you want, the one thing you're passionate about over anything in the world, because not all 18-year-olds know what that is for them. Some do, but they are far and few between. Most of them haven't identified that, because what we do find is that passion grows over time for most people. So really kind of making sure that we identify that career is a journey. If you're not, you don't have to go into something that you're super passionate about, that it never feels like you're working a day in your life, because for all of us, there are days when we would like a day off, no matter how much we love our job. So really implying that this is a journey, this is a process. We're not picking our one career job forever. I do want to share with you a couple of graphs here. Now, these are not super duper scientific. This is actually from my class that I teach. So I poll my students each semester. I've been teaching this class now. This is my third semester of the course since I wrote it. And these are what the students are reporting prior to completing the course. So one of the main questions here is, do you know how to go about picking a major? And we have about 60% have no idea how to pick a major. And I think if you were in the previous session with Claudia, she was mentioning about the career counseling with equity, that students don't even know like what a major is. And that's one of the real barriers we're up against. What does this major mean? How does it equate to a career? The next one, have you identified a major? Which is really funny, because if you look at these two graphs, they're totally flipped. So have you identified a major? Yes is around 60%, no is 37%. So I think this is really interesting, because students don't know how to go about picking a major, yet they are, is what we're getting from this. And that's typically because the system, CCC Apply, makes them pick a major. Now, the next thing up here, do you know how to use your major to get a job? Overwhelming majority, no. This is a very common theme that we see in community college and in higher education. When I used to work at a state university with senior level and graduate students, same issue. Have you heard of any technical programs that require an associate's degree but can lead to yearly incomes over 50 to 75? All of my faculty counselors working in CTE, check this one out. Over 80% have no idea that there are programs at community college that they can complete to get to these really wonderful incomes. And I believe our keynote was also talking about working in the trades. There's a huge demand for skilled trades people that work in plumbing, that work in electricity. I have friends that are electricians. They make twice what I make in academia in terms of income, and they set their schedule. It's a very relaxed schedule. So there are these really wonderful opportunities and that you can attend through the community college. There are community colleges that work with our local apprenticeships. And so our students just don't even know these opportunities exist for them. Has anyone ever explained the importance of selecting a career first and then a major? And again, the overwhelming majority is no. And this is consistent throughout the multiple semesters that I teach this class. Now, here's a little fun fact that I find. The majority of my students are not first generation, which would make sense, right? Because first generation students might not know the importance of taking a career development class. Majority are second generation. But what this also shows us is that even at the second generation, we're still not getting them the information. Now, this is a small sample set of around 200 students. This is Southwestern College students. So our student population is going to be predominantly Latinx. So we have a Latinx community that we serve. We are a Hispanic serving institution. But we do predominantly see in this class is second gen. So even that second gen, we're still not getting that message across to our students. Now I want to do a little comparison for you. Anyone remember the 90s? I can't see anybody in here. So I don't know if we're raising our hands, but if anybody 90s people, not were born in the 90s, you have to remember the 90s to actually classify for this category. So we have looking at these two different time frames, these two very different generations. When we look at 1990 and we look at 2020, and I like to believe these are actually 1990s teenagers here that I found in Google. And we look at this difference here in how they are just even in society. You see, you have these students from the 90s down at the bottom section. Their attire is different. They're holding bags. They have skateboards versus you look at the image on the top, and I'd say what you see your classic 2020 student, they're sitting there with a laptop, maybe an iPhone or a tablet, so a device engaged versus not. So what we have here is we have a generation of individuals that are connected and integrated deeply into technology. And that has become a part of their lives. So our population primarily that we work with in community college is going to be our Gen Z. So Gen Z is going to be after the millennial generation. We still get some of the younger millennials, maybe like our mid-20s students, but our bulk is Generation Z. These students grew up with technology. They never will know a time when they had to pick up the phone, hit the buttons, hope your friend answers, page people. They didn't know any of that. They've always known that they can text. They've always been able to have any question they have answered for them in a few seconds. You know, if we look back into 1990, if you had a question about what's the tallest mountain in the world, you would have hoped that your encyclopedia for M's had it in there and that you could find the M. And if you didn't, you'd have to go talk to your friends. It was a very, very different type of setup and integration into knowledge, which has really shaped our career process. Yet what I find is a lot of people are still approaching career development from that 1990s perspective. They're not including some of the additional really important components that I'll be discussing today that I have been finding are very important for our students as I've been doing research, mainly post-COVID. Once that started happening and I started seeing different shifts in what employers were doing, I dug into the research. And so this is some of my findings that I found. So let's do a little bit more of a visual comparative here from a work to career or college, high school. So sorry, start over. Going from high school into work or college with these two different years. Now I took it back a little bit to 1980 on this one because I couldn't find any photos of 1980s teenagers to incorporate for my visual aesthetics, but I still think we're going to have a very similar effect because in the 80s, we still did not have the access to technology that we do now. The personal computers was more mid to late 90s when people had personal computing at home. So we're going to get the same effect. but I want you to imagine a high school graduate. So what would they do first? They would either go to college or they would get a job. How would this 1980s high school graduate go about getting a job? They would either look in their local classified ads, their newspapers. And when I tell this to my students, they're like, what are the newspapers? What are they? Is it Craigslist? Is it Indeed? Like, what is that? They went to a local paper. Their access was local. Most people did not purchase an international newspaper, which would have jobs on an international platform or even a major paper. Usually you had your local town paper. So if you lived in San Diego, you would have your local paper. You necessarily wouldn't also be subscribing to the San Francisco Chronicle. Some would, most would not. So you have a much smaller access to job opportunities back then. You're having a local access. You might also look for paper job postings. You might walk around town, see signs up on billboards with job postings. You also may go into a place of employment and just ask, hey, are you hiring? I have my resume. A very different process. And then in this scenario, you would work your way up. Maybe you start in as a sales associate, and then you work up into like a part-time manager, then your management, then maybe you're doing floor manager. So there was this more promotional opportunity. And maybe you found a career center, maybe you didn't. And if you did find a career center, the information you had was going to be basically just the little paper folders that had all the careers into file folders. And you could look through the file folders. And if they had maybe a sheet of information on that career, you could gain some knowledge. But that was pretty much it. So we had a very limited amount of resources, which in a sense, less choices, less stress, right? I don't have as many options, so I don't have as much stress in my environment because these are my options. Also, in the 80s and even in the 90s, you could still go into many jobs and work your way up without having a significant amount of college education. You could work your way up into a decent managerial position without a bachelor's degree. And now I have students coming to me that work at local chains that if they want to go above like part-time manager, they're asking for bachelor's degrees if they want to go into management and retail. So we see a huge shift when it comes to college, the things that students need, as well as their options. Just one example, even just, 10 years ago when I was working at Sacramento State, I worked with engineering students. And the engineering students I worked with, if they had an associate's degree, maybe they transferred from community college, they could get a job as a project engineer. And that was great. They could work part-time. And then when they graduated, finished their engineering degree, they could get a job as a civil engineer or project manager. Well, now when I look at job postings on Indeed for a project engineer, the minimum qualifications are a bachelor's degree. So we have this huge shift in jobs that didn't require bachelor's degrees that are starting to. So when we go over to the 2020 environment, most of our students are really seeing the benefit of going to college because they're hearing from their friends and family that I hit a roadblock. I didn't have a degree and I got stuck. And now when I'm saying about a degree, this is not to say that trades are not wonderful occupations. It's more just to make the example, the comparison. Trades are wonderful. You don't need a formal degree, but you do need a significant amount of formal training by an apprenticeship program to be a skilled tradesperson. So let's go to 2020. You either went to work or you went to college. You might talk to your friends and family about what are the opportunities, what are you studying, what are you doing, but you also have global access. You have internet search engines. Our students can go on Google, type in whatever they want to research career opportunities. And when I talk about global access, this is huge because we're also talking about the globalization of careers, which is what our keynote was also mentioning if you were around for the keynote, that so much has changed in terms of opportunity that our students have global access. I could go right now on Indeed Ireland and start finding jobs, finding opportunities, and many of these companies will set me up with a visa so that I can go work there. So there's so many more opportunities for our students, but with opportunity also kind of comes a lot of stress. I have so many choices. what do I do? Where do I go? Where do I start? I can look at Indeed. I can look at Google Jobs. I can look at LinkedIn, but what's the best? Where do I go from here? So we have so many more different divisions our students can go down that it leads to a lot of confusion. And I find a lot of the confusion leads to stagnation. So they just kind of freeze. They're like, I don't know what to do. There's still these choices. So it gets very, very confusing for them. On top of having so many options, they also have to worry about branding, social media appearance, and that they're going to hit roadblocks for promotions in many occupations, not all, without some sort of associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. They also have opportunities for virtual career research. So they're going to have access to careers that people in the 80s never even heard of. So these students are experiencing information overload. So how do we work looking at the old way to the modern process? So just to recap, the old way was little to no career planning. The student may have been given an assessment and told these assessments will equate to a job. You can pick one based on the way you took this assessment. These are the jobs you will be good at. They might select a major, typically with little to no preparation or knowledge of the career options with that major. What we find even now is that most students will pick a major where the name of the career is in the major. Things like nursing, I'm going to be a nurse. Business, I'm going to work in business. Psychology, I want to be a psychologist. Biology, I want to be a biologist. So a civil engineer, I want to be a civil engineer. So we find that that rhetoric is still continuing because students aren't sure what that exactly means. And then what'll happen next, the old way, they might feel stuck. So it's not uncommon for Gen Xers or baby boomers to stay in a very similar career path for a while. That was very, very normal, very common to have one job for a very long time. And it's not uncommon for them to stay in a job they didn't like because they may have not had opportunities, that they may have lived in a small town and these were the top companies. And if you got a job there, that was a good job and you stuck it out and that's where you worked. So it's kind of an older mentality way of doing things. And when we shift into this modern process with primarily we're looking at our millennials and Gen Zs, they're doing this cyclical process. So career isn't like this line where you're like, oh, I went to college or I went to an apprenticeship program and now I'm working and then, woo, that's it. So it's a continuum of process of research, education and training, having a digital presence, having career awareness, rebranding and updating your brand. So even when a student develops a personal brand, that brand is not that brand. Even if you look at some of the top influencers, they're always subtly tweaking their brand because it'll become stagnant and it will become boring. So they need to stay up on new trends, new techniques. So when we look at education now, it's a continuum. Our students will always need to be training and learning new things. And this process really started to engage in the early 2000s, where you have the majority of offices utilizing Microsoft Office. And what happens when they release a new version of Microsoft Office? We all scramble. We're like, oh, where's this button? Where's this button? So our students are constantly having to deal with that, not just in a software implication, but in everyday life. New ways of doing things are always changing. Think about something as simple as Uber. When Uber first came out, people were kind of concerned. They're like, do I trust it? Do I take an Uber? It's a stranger's car. And now, well, pandemic aside, now, most people would feel quite comfortable with Uber, and if not safe. So we have to learn and adapt to technology more than any other generation prior. So our students need to make sure that they're having this presence, that it is cyclical, and that they know that college is not the end game or associate's degree or even an apprenticeship program. If they get through an apprenticeship program to be an electrician, they still have to do quite a bit of work to be a licensed electrician, which the licensed electricians are the ones that are going to be making the bigger bucks when it comes in terms of that career field. So there's always going to be training. Even as an electrician, there's new ways of doing things. There's new technology coming out. So it's this constant cyclical process. And when we talk about awareness, knowing what are the options in your industry, what else can you do besides just the initial job you came in for? And making sure that they are branding themselves on social media. Having a social media presence has almost become a need to have. And I do see the way that things are shifting into this being more of a necessity for job acquisition, having a social media presence. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that, the dangers, pros, and cons with some of our younger students, like our teens and social media. We'll be mindful of that in a different way. So this modern process is going to definitely involve some form of social media branding. And when I work with students, I say you have to have a couple different brands. So it's not just one Instagram page where they share their stuff. Usually they're going to have at least two brands. They're going to have their personal brand, which is going to be their personal page, and they're going to have some kind of interest brand page. Now, when I'm working with students, I definitely like to educate them on trolls that can come into social media. There are people that are quite nasty, will leave negative comments, will attack people, and they exist on social media, and they are kind of the bummer part of social media. But without having that brand piece, it leaves our students with a missing component of opportunity. So students need to share their story. Starting younger is better. They can always turn off comments. If you have students that are a bit more sensitive to comments, you can turn off comments now on a lot of posts. That does affect engagement a bit. But if you're doing an activity with students, you want to talk about branding with them, that's always something you could do. And it's always important to talk about trolls, because trolls are people that will go into social media accounts and leave nasty comments. And if our younger students are a little bit more sensitive or not as resilient in terms of saying, oh, it's just a troll, let me ignore them. Those are some really great conversations to have if you want to engage students in more social media type activities. But they need to have something, they really do, even if it's a LinkedIn. So it doesn't necessarily have to be one of these platforms. These ones are nice because it's nice to follow the hot platform. And the hot platform is important because this is a nice addition to a resume now. So if I'm applying, let's say I want an internship at the San Diego Zoo, and I have an Instagram account with, let's just say 1,000 followers. That's a decent amount for a student. And it's all about my love of animals. You bet I can put that on my resume. And now I have another little chunk of information to add to my resume that shows my strong interest and desire to work with animals. So there's a lot of opportunity to be had here. And it's important for students to start this at an age that's convenient to them, where they're comfortable building this positive brand that's going to grow, because growth is slow on social media for most people. Most people are not overnight successes with 1 million followers, not common. So really important to have conversations about social media presence with students. And ultimately, when we're really looking at this process of how does a student get to that first job, you're welcome to take a picture of this. I don't mind if you want to see kind of my layout that I work through. How does a student nowadays in the modern times go through all of these components? They're going to need to do research, and they're going to need to know how to do research. Most students don't know what career research is. So when we say to them, you know, have you done career research? They might say yes. And I encourage you to ask them, what does that mean to you? What have you done specifically in regards to career research? They're going to need to explore. There's going to be so many options for them. They need to dig deeper. Informational interviews, job shadows. I find actually informational interviews are easier to get right now because of COVID, and most people are working remote. They are more inclined to talk to our students. They need to identify a career field. We're not having them identify a job yet. We want them to know what their job options are. We want them to look at potential employers. This is kind of that stage 3 area. And then the last one would be major selection. And I tell my students, pick a major where there's a lot of stuff you like that you can do with that major. Do some internships, do some networking, and figure out a first starting job. Not the job you're going to do forever, just a target first job that you're going to get into. And when I find, even when I show this design to students, this graphic layout, you can just see them stop feeling as stressed. You can see it physically on their body. They're like, oh, I don't have to pick a job for the rest of my life today. Okay, I feel a lot better. I can do this. Like, you can see that confidence start to build in them. When I show them, it's actually quite simple. It's just 4 steps. This is all you need to do. And I'm going to show you how to go about doing that. Huge, huge benefit to our students when we can eliminate that myth and explain that this is quite a simple process and that they're not picking a job forever. And the fact is, their interests are going to change. What they like at 18, they're probably not going to like at 38, and that will change what their career interests look like then as well. When we also look at the speed of change, we talk about our students are going to have change throughout their lives. And our students also, this is the fastest pace of change in modern history. So things move quick. So traditional education, though, tends to move a little slower, often because we're tied to things like budgets, state income. We typically don't have the money to move as quick as we need to. So what's growing, and what I do recommend my students look into, is peer-to-peer learning. You can find anything on YouTube. There's also websites like Udemy, it's Udemy, where you have individuals that have created training courses for almost anything, but you can get several IT certificates on Udemy. So the Udemy platform has individuals who go on there, create the training for individuals so they can take the exam to get IT certifications for quite affordable costs. And on occasion, when they have sales, you can get these sometimes what would be $500-600 trainings for $30. So there's a lot of opportunity for our students to add on to their traditional education with these faster pace opportunities through digital media. But we're not the only ones. They're not the only ones who have discovered this. Even big schools like Harvard and Yale are creating digital options for education that are accessible to anyone. They have free courses. They have some low cost courses. So even some of the bigger Ivy League schools are getting in on this game where they have people creating content that people can learn on their own. So it's self-paced peer-to-peer learning. And when we look at the COVID pandemic, what's really interesting sociologically is how we all adapted in education, right? It was a tough transition. I don't know about you guys, but how we were able to shift into the digital realm so quickly. I think what's interesting is it kind of showed us like we can do it. We definitely had a lot of speed bumps. I'm sure all of you watching had similar speed bumps, but we can do it. And what I actually found with a lot of my students is that I actually had new students who came to take classes because it was remote, because now they could actually complete their degree because it was remote, because they had the opportunity. So I definitely think that this forced adaptation also did create a lot of opportunity for students who wanted to have this digital realm experience, who wanted that type of peer-to-peer learning, or when they could access the content and knowledge on their own as they go, still having the facilitated professor. It was quite interesting to see. So I'm really intrigued with how this will shift education in the future. So always encouraging students to use peer-to-peer learning, looking at YouTube. There are some professional YouTubers that have amazing content, and YouTuber is a career, it is a job title. The students can make a significant amount of income on YouTube if they can curate really unique content. Now, when I talk about all those brands that our students need to have, what does that look like? How do you create that experience on social media? So these are some examples of my 3 brands that I have right now on social media. I'm actively working to build my brands and to curate content that is specific so that when you go to my page, you know that you're on my Instagram, you know that you're on my website, you know that you're on my LinkedIn, because everything flows together. And that's how we would create a brand. And I've been going through a bunch of training like all last summer, trying to learn this for students. And I'm like, gosh, they need to know this. They need to have this content. And so what I have here are 3 separate brands. My personal brand is going to be here. And this is private, my private Instagram account. This is just for my family, my friends. That's pretty much it. It's a private account. I don't add anyone that I don't personally know. And it's pretty much pictures of my kid. That's about it. And that's my personal brand. My professional brand, one of them is Connect Career Consulting. And this is where I'm having my professional presence as an educational trainer, as a career counselor, and as a career coach, and the information that I provide there. So that content is going to be specific, and I'm going to create content that would be digestible by people in education because that's my target audience. Having this presence, if I can grow this more, helps give me more credibility as a trainer. So having a social media presence equates to credibility now. Also, this is my 3rd brand. I own a small retail store that sells metaphysical items. Now, this is very different. I would not put my metaphysical items store stuff on Connect Career Consulting because those brands are completely separate. That would be confusing to a consumer who came to Connect Career Consulting expecting to get career counseling, and they're like, why does she have metaphysical items on here? This is confusing. So creating a clear distinction between the brands. This is a lot of work, my friends. And so it's really important that we teach our students how to build these different brand experiences. There are 2 really good YouTube channels that address this. One is the Social Media Examiner, and the other one is Vanessa Lau, L-A-U, Vanessa Lau. 2 YouTube channels that create this content in a very educational and professional way. Vanessa Lau has a little more personal content. The Social Media Examiner is straight social media, and they're a social media marketing firm. And so students can get this information and training for free. So can you. I do trainings on this geared towards how you would teach it to students because they're going to need this. And here's a really funny little LinkedIn story for you. So I have I think a pretty decent LinkedIn page. It could always use improvement as anything with social media. And I was actually applied for a freelance position through LinkedIn. I wanted to work as one of their career coaches. I was like, oh, that'd be fun. It's just freelance. I'll put my hat in the ring and see what happens. And I applied for the position, and I have very extensive experience related to this type of work. And they responded to me like a personal response. That was really wonderful. And they said, you have wonderful work experience. However, you don't have enough engagement in your LinkedIn. And we want someone who has at least 15 personal references on their LinkedIn. And I just thought, wow, this is the future. This is the future. So our students really need to have some sort of brand and reputation. Now, they can use the initial platforms I showed you. Those forms are what our students are most familiar with, very knowledgeable on them. I always encourage my students in every session, what is it you're interested in that you think is fun? Put it out there. You can keep it as private as you want or as public as you want, but creating something. And so having that public versus that private image for our students, the more comfortable they are with the public image, the better. Most of our Gen Zs are pretty comfortable with that stuff. And then when it comes to LinkedIn, not just the references component, but having a digital presence and a professional format. So most of our students see LinkedIn and they're kind of like, oh, well, isn't that for people that have jobs? And I said, it's also for people that are trying to get jobs, especially college students, because just like the Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, those take time to build a following. So does LinkedIn. That will take time as well. You don't just wake up and have like 500 connections. And in LinkedIn, that wouldn't actually be the best thing. You want to have engagement, not just bodies. But it also allows you to build that reputation. For me now, I'm thinking like, wow, I need to work to curate a little bit more on the references because, that's a very interesting perspective that, hey, you didn't have enough handwritten references. So even though you educationally have the much, we don't have enough to verify that you were actually good at what you do. It's really fascinating. Also, we really want to be able to showcase our education and training as we get it, as we grow. But one of the main things that I like LinkedIn for students is easy apply for jobs and recruiters. Recruiters almost exclusively use LinkedIn to find part-time and full-time employees because it's easy. They can go in there, they just type in what they want, and LinkedIn gives them a list of people. I have friends that work in HR. They exclusively use LinkedIn. They do have to pay on their end, but our students do not have to pay. And the paid account is not worth it to most of our students. Rare scenarios, but not for most. So this is a great way for students to be visible and to easily start to build a digital presence if they're not comfortable or if you feel like they're not ready, if you work with younger students, for the other platforms. But even if you don't want to actually use a platform when you're working with students, you could easily make this an assignment where a student has to digitally put together like a fake social media account with just images. How would it look? To teach them about branding and connecting all the imagery. So if you'll notice here too on the top, here's my LinkedIn. Now this is from my phone. You'll see that this here, this background, this color is matching all of the coloring on the slides. If you go to my website, you will see that that coloring does match. So when you see that, it becomes behaviorally ingrained that that is me. That is Connect Career Consulting. That's what that color is. Think of the target symbol. We all know what the target symbol looks like. If you see it anywhere, you're going to think that is the Target store, even though the Target initially had a different symbolism to it. So building these components for our students is so important in terms of their future career prospects. And especially because there's so many more career opportunities in this digital workforce for our students. I was just talking actually before, if you all were here a little early, to Leslie, and I have a bunch of friends who work in the Silicon Valley in the Bay Area at various tech companies. And once COVID hit and they had to go work remote, overwhelming majority of the companies they work for said, don't bother coming back. And not like you're laid off, but we can do this remote. And actually, they had increased productivity and they had less people calling in sick to work. And it saved them a ton of money. I mean, can you imagine the cost of rent on those office buildings in the Bay Area? And so a lot of those companies are now transitioning to a fully digital workforce, or they have a shared office space and like they split days of the week to save money. So a lot of companies are really starting to stick with this digital environment. Now, what also comes with the digital environment for our students is digital interviewing. And this has become very, very interesting. And I've been doing digital interviews for a long time because I used to work in HR, and we back in the day did Skype interviews before we did the Zoom interviews now. So I definitely have experience with this. And what's really interesting is how different this is, because you think, oh, it's simple. I just, go sit down on my computer, much easier than having to drive and park and all of that. But actually, it's quite more complicated, because when you go in person, you primarily have to worry about your attire, directions. You practice, of course, prior to an interview. But in digital, I have to worry about technology capabilities. Is my internet speed fast enough? As you know, a lot of our students don't have access to quality high-speed internet. Is my lighting good? So I have lighting in here so you can see me well. Is my face lit so you can see my facial features, because you're all reading my body language while you're watching this, and it's telling you something about me, and that's important. Does my camera work? Is my microphone going to work well? I've had issues where I have an extra pair of these brand new, because I do a lot of trainings just in case these guys break on me or stop working. But imagine if you're a student or interviewing and you don't have a backup. Do you have a quiet space? Many of us have small children or family members in our home. And the bummer with this is that it's everything that's ever you have to do in person, and then these extra topics. So there's more to worry about, more to set up for our students. It's actually not more simpler. So there's a more complexity in what our students also need to do when it comes to career development and interviewing. So that old rhetoric of preparing a student for an interview and talking about attire and what to say, those are great basis, but we also need to start adding in all these extra components. And even though majority of companies switched to digital interviewing because of the pandemic, many companies were already doing this before. Companies like Apple started texting for an interview. They would send you a text, you would click the link, it would schedule an interview, which you would do from your smartphone. Other companies like Abercrombie was doing pre-recorded interviews. So you had to answer a series of questions. It was a software that recorded your interview, and then that was sent to the hiring manager because they had such a high quantity of people interviewing. So these are some things we definitely need to add in when we talk about modern career development, modern interviewing techniques when we speak with our students, making sure that possibly they have an extra microphone or a backup option. They have a smartphone if they're using that, but do they have a laptop? Have they tested the software to make sure it works and they know how to use it? So a lot more things to consider. And with all of this, when we talk about social media, peer-to-peer, Udemy, YouTube influencers, our students really need to, I like to say ABL, they always got to be learning, always be learning. Our students don't get to learn something and then be like, oh, I know it all, I'm done, I'm fine. We may have felt that way at like a 21, 22, but we're never going to know it all. There's always more to learn, and especially because of technology. Technology is consistently changing. If there's one thing we can count on, it's technology to change. So we really need to make sure our students know that even if they're coming to see us at college or they're going to go to college, that is not the end game. They're not going to finish college and be like, I have a degree, I'm done. There's always more to learn, always more trainings. And I believe also the keynote was mentioning how many college graduates that she had coming back to do certificate programs. So making sure that we tell our students you will always be learning. Now, when we bring all of this together, all these ideas, all these thoughts, really what students need to make sure they know is that they do career research and they have identified multiple opportunities. I don't want my students picking one job forever because it's not real, not realistic. I want them to know what jobs do they like, and let's talk about a target first job. Also, they need to have some kind of professional brand, whether that be through Instagram and Facebook or LinkedIn. I think you might be surprised to find many of your students probably have a decent brand on one of these social media platforms already. They need to know they're going to be doing continuous learning. They need to be mindful. They need to understand about what is happening, what can change, and they need to be present. they need to have next steps plans. So they always have to know that, yes, I'm doing this job now, but what could I be doing next? How could I improve? Because if they don't, other people will. So there's a little bit more competition because we have more access to knowledge for improvement in terms of career improvement in terms of skills or abilities. And then also, they also have to know that most likely what they're doing is temporary. Right now, the research that came out of the National Career Development Association is showing that our Gen Z and millennials are changing jobs every 4.7 years because they can, because they have so many more opportunities than the previous generations had. If they're at a company and they don't like it, they don't like the community, they don't like the culture, they will leave. And there's actually a lot of big companies that hire people like me to help with their culture so they can actually get millennials and Gen Zers, not quite Gen Zers, they're almost there, but most of them to start working for them and staying employed with them. Companies that do this well are Google. Google's one of the top companies. Qualcomm has been up there for doing this well also. So there are companies that are now trying to figure out how can I keep them? So when we look back at like our baby boomer generation, some of the older Gen X population, that wasn't the case. It was if you got a job that was really good and you had your job and you worked there. It wasn't that you needed to change all the time, but it's a different shift in terms of the occupational workforce when we have the Gen Z and millennials are like, well, if I don't like the environment, I'm out of here. There's something new for me around the corner. And the fact is, there is out there if they're willing to move and relocate, which most millennials and Gen Z are willing to do that. So very, very different. What I do want to mention, though, for all of you, because I know we have primarily counselors and maybe some educators in here, if you use Canvas, we do the community college system. I don't know about the high schools. I do have a collection of free career assignments. I do have a free module in there. If you want to check it out, those are all free for you to use. Just search my last name, Corbisiero, in the Commons for the free assignments. I have some sample discussions. In my dream world, every professor, every counselor, if you teach a counseling type or personal development class, would use at least one of these assignments, because I feel like a lot of our students don't get that opportunity to dig into career development as much as I would love them to. So even if you just use one of these assignments, you're going to get the wheels spinning like, oh, there's more opportunity. There's more options than I initially thought, because our students typically come to us with limited options. Basically because that's all they know. And they don't want to go searching stuff because they might get overwhelmed. So if you can use any of these activities, that'd be super awesome. And they are all absolutely free for you all to use. Those are going to be in the Commons. This is my contact information if you have any questions. If you know me personally, please do not email me at Southwestern College if you have questions, because I'm getting, just like many of you, so many emails that I just really want to make sure that's saved for my students so that I can get to all of their emails. So if you have any questions about this workshop or the work that I do, please email my private practice here. And also I do want to mention in January, I do have an intern joining me who specializes in IT and cybersecurity, and also with musicians. And he's going to be offering career coaching for $1, maybe $5. We have to agree on the exact amount with his program. He's in a graduate program for coaching. There's a certain number we have to charge, but it won't be any more than $5. We're trying to make it free. If you know of somebody who's maybe not in college, but needs assistance and needs low cost, accessible coaching to help them get to the next level in IT or cybersecurity, we are going to be having his calendar up on our website in January. So if you know people that are in need, that's a service that we're going to have on the website. So low and no cost for those people who need it that can access it at a college or a university. So I hope that helps you all get some insight into the different process for career development that our students are going into. They're not in this one line trajectory. They have so many more options. So it's even more important for them to understand how to do career research, how to navigate the internet, how to have some sort of professional branding, and how to incorporate the digital components into every aspect of those traditional workshops we do with them. It shouldn't just be resume workshop. It's going to be resume LinkedIn workshop. It shouldn't just be interviewing. It's going to be interviewing and Zoom interviewing. How to use Microsoft Teams. What does that look like? Microsoft Teams and Zooms are the top 2 software platforms being utilized right now by most companies. So we really need to start integrating that into the type of workshops we do for students. All right, well, it was lovely presenting this information for you all today. Thank you all for hanging out and watching. I'm actually done a little bit early, which rarely happens for me. I'm an ENFJ, so I'll talk all day about career stuff. But if anyone has questions, I'm going to stop sharing here and I'll see if we have any.
Thanks, Kelly. We did have a few questions that came into the Q&A in the Whova platform. The first one was early on in your presentation when you were mentioning a particular career book. And I think I may have gotten it right, but I just want to confirm with you. Is it called Luck is No Accident?
Yes.
Okay.
Making
Excellent.
the most of happenstance.
So Luck is No, so I think I responded correctly into the Q&A on that one.
It's on Amazon.
And then we had another question about, can you explain more about what engagement means on LinkedIn?
Absolutely, great question. So when I teach LinkedIn workshops, I actually show students how to post. How do you go and post and comment on other people's posts? So engagement would mean that you're actually making connections with people, but then you're also commenting. So engaging with someone else. So let's say one of my colleagues posts an article about career development and I read the article and I'll comment, wow, that was a great article, good share, good information. So it can be something as simple as that. But engagement can also be a little bit more in depth. So perhaps you join a LinkedIn group. LinkedIn groups, much like their counterpart of Facebook groups, if you're familiar with those, have high levels of engagement, meaning that you need to comment. You need to be involved in the conversation. You can't just join as a little ghost and just hang out there, or it won't benefit you. So that's definitely how students can engage on LinkedIn, just like they would in any other social media platform. Hope that answers your question.
Excellent. And yeah, if for folks who had those questions, if there's any follow-up you want to ask, please go ahead and type it into the Q&A section of the Whova platform. We had another question from somebody who specifically is a high school counselor and without a Canvas account. How could they get the lessons?
Send me an email. Yeah, I think I have it up on the, oh, I stopped sharing. Let me share so I can have that up while we're discussing. If I get a ton of emails, I might make a web page on my website.
And for folks, if you don't get it, if you didn't write this down, Kellie's presentation is also something you can download when you're in the Whova platform, in the session right now. You just scroll down to the bottom and there's a section where it talks about handouts and you can download her presentation. And then of course you can find, all of those things that she referenced in her presentation today. All right, are there any other questions? I want to encourage folks, we do have, some time left. I had a question in there, but I feel like if other participants have other questions, I'd rather hear from them. Anything in the chat? Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I'll just ask the one that I had. Do you happen to see that there are some industries over others that require a greater digital presence?
I'd say it's pretty even across the board in terms of what I've noticed, and this is just personal experience, that they definitely want to see some type of digital engagement. And this is when it comes to specifically LinkedIn. Now in higher ed, it's a little different because there's different hiring practices that we follow in higher education where we typically couldn't necessarily utilize someone's social media platform as a qualifier for employment, but in other industries, they can. So there was a lawsuit many years ago about can an employer use your Facebook public information as information for judging you as a potential employee, and that lawsuit was actually lost, and so people can. So that's actually not illegal for people to do that. So that's where I also talk with students about having a positive presence. Really, if an employer were to Google you, which they can, there's nothing against the law with them Googling you and making a decision to hire you or not based on what they find. You'd want them to find your LinkedIn page. You'd want them to come across this nice professional photo of you, some information about your background, especially if it's an internship. And I tell my students, like, you have a nice little collared shirt on, and you look nice in the photo, you have a little professional look to you. It's definitely going to make you stand out for a potential position. And I know many people that still work in HR, as I used to do, and most of them that work in private companies, they do Google the applicant's name and they want to see what they have. But to be honest, most private companies are using LinkedIn to actually find and curate employees. So that's really where the huge piece is. 80% of recruiters are using LinkedIn. And if our students are not on there, they're missing out on a huge chunk of opportunity as well. Hope that answers your question.
Very helpful. See, I think there was another one that came in. Yeah, somebody just put in, while I certainly agree about the digital world and presence for the engineer or BA students, are you finding some industries are not requiring a digital presence? For example, I am not finding digital presence important for CTE employers.
I think it really depends, and right now I see this as something that's growing. I see this as more of a futuristic happening. At this time, many CTE employers might not be there yet. But what I also like to say is, let's say you're applying to work as a dental hygienist and you have a whole social media platform about teeth health and gum health and why it's important. And maybe you talk about how to brush kids' teeth properly. And you add that to your resume as I have a following, this is my Instagram. I definitely think that would add to your application if you were applying to work in a dental office for a CT type of occupation. There could be a benefit, or if you were a CNA, a certified nurse assistant, which is one of the programs we offer at Southwestern College, and you had a presence talking about proper home health care, how to lift people, like things that people could do with their elderly family members, just basics, and you add that to your resume, I think it definitely juices up the resume and it makes you stand out. So while it might not be required, and I won't say it's required for any field, but by no means is it required, it's just more of a booster. It definitely makes things look a little nicer. Now, of course, if your student wants to work in social media marketing, they definitely need a social media presence. But for other occupations, it's more of a benefit, not necessarily a requirement. But I do see this becoming more and more of a demand as more people have a social media presence.
There was another question that just came in. We are seeing more older returning students in their 30s, 40s, or older who have been laid off and looking for new careers. What advice would you give those students?
Work with a lot of those students myself as well. It's definitely hard, especially those forced career changes. So depends on the student, but I definitely get them involved and comfortable with LinkedIn for sure. I want to address what their experience is. And LinkedIn's really easy to use now. It was very complicated before, but I find that some of my students that are older returning maybe weren't as into LinkedIn because they didn't need to be. They had a job that perhaps didn't involve it or require it. I also like to figure out and identify what each of them needs. Do they have a family? Do they need a job right away? Can they invest in more education? Do they want to do two-year transfer? So there's definitely many components that I would explore with those students. But if there was one overall arching importance, is for them to be comfortable with, at the very least, LinkedIn. And many returning students do have a decent amount of work experience that they can build a decent LinkedIn page too. So probably my overarching would be start getting comfortable with LinkedIn and then determining what their goals are, what they need, and then how much time they want to spend reaching those goals as well.
Okay, so I think that might have been the end of our questions that I saw in the Q&A. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody. So if you have any last minute questions, we do have 2 minutes left. Otherwise, I just want to make sure that I ask folks to please rate the session that you were just participating in. So in the Whova platform, underneath the video where it has the breakout title, you'll see a box that says rate session. And if you like today's session, please go ahead and like the session talking about a social media, digital presence sort of thing. It's great that we have this like session option in here too. And I do see a couple of comments in the chat that say, thank you so much for a great session. Really great information to reflect upon.
Thank you all for coming today. I appreciate all of you and the work that you do with students and in education.
All right.
I'm gonna stop my share. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank
Leslie,
you
for
so
putting
much,
everything.
everyone. Yeah,
Sorry,
absolutely. Thanks for everyone for attending. And I hope you enjoyed your first sessions for this conference. And we look forward to seeing everyone back again tomorrow.